Welcome to SciTech Culture with Steve Kern and Ben Warner, where we examine science, technology and culture in the 21st century. Visit our website at scitechculture.com. Hello and welcome to SciTech Culture. My name is Ben Warner and I'm joined by my good friend and colleague Steve Kern to talk about how all the big tech giants are having potentially a fairly significant impact on us from a behavioural standpoint in society. It's a lot of articles about that have been written recently, and you could get scared by it, but it's not as if, I mean, who knows where we're going with it, but there might be a chance to correct the course as we explore this topic. Is there any sort of initial thoughts on that you had, that maybe the Amazons of the world, the Apples of the world, Google, Facebook, that they're sort of blindly going forward with what they're doing, but without much regard for the impact?
Well, yeah, I think there's two ways to read this current, trend in opinion that's out there. One is that it's kind of relates back to the old Microsoft antitrust, and there are people out there concerned about the power that these companies have, and they have unprecedented power, more than Microsoft ever had. Microsoft just dominated a market. These guys now dominate the data and the market. So they have unlimited information. They have more information on us than the government does. So, I guess that's one side of it. But then the other side of it is probably more around just the fact that this is new technology. It impacts our lives socially, which is something that probably technology has always done. But this is probably at the extreme end of it. And we're not prepared. I mean, we've spoken about this for years now, Ben. Ethically, we're not prepared to have the discussions as to what constitutes the right way to, share information and communicate or share that data in an online setting. And each one of those organisations, is selling you something, or it's connecting people with particular views, and very market driven and very sort of, very introspective.
Well, if you think about if you take some of these as like real sort of examples. So, for instance, you got Amazon that is sort of totally dominating the retail space, and one can't argue that the service they've created is very convenient. It's very you go in, you can pretty much find whatever you want, and it gets delivered to you the next day. And I'm sure they'll get to a point where they'll deliver it to you within 30 minutes or 10 minutes or something. But it's coming potentially at maybe from their perspective an unintended cost, which is bricks and mortar retail starts going out of business. And then if you get all of that sort of going in, if you get that cascade happening, what does that do to the employment opportunities, or even just the simple nice factor of walking into a store and looking at stuff to buy, as opposed to just clicking a couple of items on your screen, and then you have a look at something like Google, which is monopolizing all your data and your privacy, and the fact that they could potentially know everything about you. Now, with the intention being that they're looking at providing you with services to make your life easier. You wanted to find out about X, Y, or Z, and because Google knows A, B, and C about you, they'll be able to point you faster in the direction of X, Y, and Z. Doesn't sound like too bad a thing, but then if they've collected a treasure trove of information that could be potentially used against you, that could be, problematic. And then there's Facebook, which you could argue is inadvertently sowing the seeds of public disunity, for lack of a better word, through fake news, through the distribution of nebulous stories and data and whatever else, and being manipulated by nefarious characters who know how to get their bots out there and punch that sort of information out to the public. And that has real consequences in terms of how different groups of people can relate to each other. So if you look at those sorts of things, it's like they went into it with, we want to do this really cool thing, and then it just took on a life of its own, and they're still in the phrase of, we want to keep doing this cool thing, but without really understanding that, now it's got to the point where maybe we need to look at this a little bit differently.
Oh, look, absolutely. You know, you've got effectively technology is neutral. So Facebook, if nobody used it, well, Facebook, you know, the technology isn't good or bad. But I think what you see on Facebook, perhaps all the ugly things on Facebook are all the ugly sides of humanity. And, you know, like we like to keep them hidden, but Facebook doesn't. And that's why Facebook is facing the issues that it is. It's not because Facebook is inherently bad. And just on that, I think the Facebook model is going to have to change a whole lot at the moment, and not just because of the fake news or issues, but because I think the way people are using Facebook has changed so much. I wouldn't be so sure that the original Facebook model would work so well. Google, you know, used to be don't be evil, but, you know, now you'd question whether or not they are. Amazon, you know, all of these organisations have created enormous benefit for us. You know, no matter how people feel about those brands today, they've created enormous benefit. However, there's always a downside. And the real issue I see is not so much these companies, but the fact that people aren't equipped to be able to deal with the issues around this. You know, I mean, I'm still surprised at how many people, you know, I hear talking about how afraid they are of the government having their data. Well, you know, you might as well let the government know everything about you because Google does. So
I would have almost thought at this point that the government is almost an amateur by comparison in this case.
Look, you know, the government is, by its nature, so poorly organised across so many multiple divisions, departments and touch points that it will take 100 years to sort that out. Google's got all your data in one point and it puts one algorithm over it and it can find whatever it needs to find much easier. So, you know, and anyone who has access to that data who wants to manipulate you can. And that's what we're seeing now. I think it's a perfectly fair idea that you would use the microphone in a phone to listen into your conversation. And if you say, I'm thinking about, you know, joining up a gym, well, it probably makes sense then that I get an ad showing me a special on at a local gym. In reality, though, it's probably very intrusive and really it's manipulative because it doesn't allow me as a human to make the choice myself. It requires me to be very passive and the only action I make is accepting an offer. And I think that that's probably got a lot more downside to it, not in terms of the technology, but in terms of the way we as humans become more, I don't know, or less human or less interested about our lives.
It's almost as if these services that these companies are providing have become so big and so successful and so vital in everyday life that they're almost crossing the line to becoming utilities as opposed to services. So, I mean, you know, the idea of Facebook being a utility, I'm not, you know, I'd have to chuckle at that, even with Mark Zuckerberg's kind of statement the other in this article that I read that he's apologizing for all the bad stuff that happened on Facebook in 2017 and he's going to get his crack team onto it to to improve things. And there was that announcement of they were going to change the timeline and put it back to focusing on connecting people as opposed to dishing up news stories. But if they get to a point where people are using them like utilities, it would almost seem like that they can't be in a position to regulate themselves.
No, well, that's right. But I mean, I'll be interested on what you think, with regard to Facebook. I don't think Facebook did anything wrong. The fact that Facebook didn't have any protection or systems in there to block what happened, say, with the around the election propaganda, et cetera, to me, that's an exploitation of Facebook's technological capability. Now, maybe it's wrong, but this idea that, somehow, I don't know, would you make alcohol producers responsible for every drink driving incident? You wouldn't. So I don't think it's fair to do that to Facebook. Having said that, it comes back to individual responsibility, which society really seems to be deferring to technology on. It's much easier to let Alexa decide what gym I should join than me actually sitting down and thinking about it. It's much easier just to accept the fake news that gets served up to me on social media than me actually taking the time to find out the truth.
Well,
that's the danger.
And that kind of highlights maybe the difference maybe between the two examples, that it sort of in many ways it appeals to baser instincts that we have that don't serve us well. But the other aspect of it is the sheer scale of it. So, if you think about the drunk driver example, there's a lot of that's happening, but a lot of people wouldn't necessarily be affected by, breath testing, for instance, because they haven't been drinking, and they wouldn't think twice about it. But the sheer scale of the influence that these tech giants are having is with so many people across so many countries, and it's so widespread that it might not be as simple as that.
Well, I completely agree on the scale, because scale is where the difference is. There's always, in a human world where there's no technology, there's always room to wriggle. You can pretend you're someone else. You can bend the rules, because a human talking to a human can bend the rules. What we're seeing now in this technology is it's pervasive. It's in every single part of our existence now, and I assume it'll get to a point where, basically you won't be able to lie. Even little white lies, you won't be able to. Wiggle like humans like to wiggle. And I think that's the thing that'll become really, really oppressive for humans. And the thing is, it won't be the technology that's done it. It'll be the way we interpret our use of technology.
Yeah. Well, just as we sort of slowly to wrap it up, if you think of, I actually think of something like Twitter, for instance, which has an amazing capability, but it's almost, the more I look at popular media and culture, whenever they mention Twitter, like it's almost like and everyone's described, well, maybe not everyone, but most people are describing it as like a cesspool of negative behavior to the point where I was watching someone talk about what they do and how they handle their Twitter account, because they get a lot of really negative mentions thrown back at them, and they basically just said, when I first started it, I'd just get depressed reading it, because these people were like sending me all of this like crap my way. But then I realized all I had to do was just switch it off, so it didn't notify me when these things would come through. I didn't read them, and then it was like how it was before, in the sense that maybe if you went out and made a public statement, you would have had all of those 10,000 people who would have thrown you a bad mention sort of get upset at you, but they didn't have an ability to send it to you, other than maybe a letter or an email or something, which would have been too much of a hassle for these people to do. But on Twitter, it's it takes 2 seconds to do. So maybe it just comes back to, how is it that we introduce an element of education for the user, and whether these big companies have a role to play in that.
Well, that's right. I mean, it's I don't know where the answer sits there, and I think that's where these opinion sort of trends are coming from. People are saying, well, somebody's got to provide leadership. Unfortunately, I don't think it could be the government. I don't think it's necessarily fair to expect the companies to foresee every pitfall. And remembering they've provided a lot of benefits. So then it can only come back to the user. I mean, I sometimes wonder what happens when someone invents some AI that can go through LinkedIn and determine everyone who's lied about what they've done.
Yeah.
That'll be interesting, won't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Will that be a good thing or a bad thing? When you see how many people have lied on LinkedIn? Because I reckon it's about 80%.
Well, we'll table that one for another time. But we'll wrap it up there, Steve. And I still enjoy all of these services, and I would think that as a whole, we're not worse off for them. It's just a case of how do we How do we get them to better integrate with the society as a whole?
Well, that's going to be a long-term question for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so don't forget our website, scitechculture.com. You can get all of our links and content there. We've got our videos on YouTube and Vimeo, blogs, RSS feeds, the whole works. So hopefully when you visit the website, you'll find something to enjoy, including a video like this one. All right, so that's it for this episode. We'll catch you next time.